So even if a merchant, if you go and ring up the merchant and say, I'm looking for rye, what's the story with sowing rye? And they tell you, well, I don't know, is there a market there? We can still do the same thing. You speak to your tillage advisor, they will speak to the pig advisor, and between the two of us, we will find a seller and a buyer. And then it's a case of those going to the merchant then and saying, right, I'm looking to sow it, I'm looking to buy it, we're looking for you to handle it, and what would the implications be of that?
As we approach the main planting window for winter cereals, decisions around crop mix are coming into sharp focus. With high global supplies influencing forward prices, the question of how to maximise farm margins is more important than ever. Could a wider range of crops be part of the answer? You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. In this final extract from the recent Teagasc Crops Forum, we will return to rye and look at the potential markets and, most importantly, whether it can deliver better margins compared to other crops. Firstly, we'll hear from Michael McKeon, a Teagasc Pig and Poultry Specialist, who will outline where rye fits into pig rations.
If you're not familiar with the pig sector, PwC did a report back in 2022. It's a relatively small sector, but the output is really, really high. So PwC estimated that the value of the pig sector to the Irish economy was 1.5 billion. And out of this, we export about 300,000 tonnes of pig meat, which is worth just under €1 billion, 932 million. And the sector employs about a little over 8,500 people. Between direct employment and the associated industries. So, as I said, it's a relatively small sector, but the output of it is quite substantial. So, from a grain usage point of view, if we look at it like that, the feed usage of the pig sector is estimated to be 1.2 million tonnes a year. Okay, so this is including grain products, soybean, and some fibrous products as well. If we just look, though, at the grain element of it, it's estimated that the annual grain usage is about 480,000 tonnes of barley, 360,000 tonnes of wheat, and about 120,000 tonnes of maize every year. So, as a potential buyer of rye, the pig sector will be very, very interested in rye and will be probably one of the main buyers of rye if you were to grow it. It's worth noting that in the sector, 50% of the producers are home millers. So they're producing their feed on farm. So this gives some opportunities for farm-to-farm selling. And it's something that we'll address later on. And Professor John O'Doherty will speak about in the next section too, as some of the options on that. But it's just to be aware of, it doesn't necessarily have to be the compound mills. It's also the home millers who will have a big element to this as well. So you are what you eat. So we often hear this from the medical profession. So whether you're eating a Mars bar or lettuce leaves or whatever, you're going to be told by your doctor when he looks at the cholesterol, you are what you eat. So if that's true for the pig sector, it's really, really true. If it's true for the human sector, it's really, really true for the pig sector. So pigs are very, very, the amount that they eat and what they eat is extremely important. 70% of the cost of producing a pig is feed. But as I said, it's not just the volume of feed that's the important thing. It is the quality of feed and the efficiency of that feed usage. And this is really, really important. No different than the tillage sector, the pig sector margins are very, very tight. So a little bit either way is enough to be the difference if it's profitable or if it's a loss for that year. If we take it from, just as an example, we all know of feed conversion efficiency. So generally for a finisher pig, a feed conversion efficiency might be at 2.5, which means it takes 2.5 kilos of feed to put on 1 kilo of live weight. But if something happened and we didn't use a feed ingredient that was good, or there was something happened with the efficiencies, the feed efficiency might go from 2.5 to 2.7. So that means for an average pig, it's eating about 200 grams a day extra to put on the 1 kilo of live weight. You kind of go, that's not too much. It doesn't sound too big. But if we took this going from 2.5 to 2.7 just for the finishers alone, irrespective of smaller pigs, that would cost the average pig farm about 124,000 in a year. So for a lot of pig farms, that's the profit wiped out for a year. So it's very, very important when we speak about feeding and the feed and nutrition of pigs. it's not just the volume, it's the quality of the feed ingredients is extremely important. So pig producers, the first thing they're going to ask, if we're out there to say, would you think of using rye? They're going to want to know what is the quality of the ingredients of the grain. So why rye? So Richie mentioned there a few of the figures. Why, as a pig sector, have we an interest in rye? If you put your nutritionist hat on, what you're going to compare rye to is the standard, is the wheat and barley, the really, really good quality ingredients, the standard ingredients. So how is rye going to stack up in that when we look at that from an energy point of view, from net energy, or we look at it from a protein point of view? How does it rank? So we're looking at it from a nutritionist point of view. Here are some of the values here. And for those who are hard of sight, rye there is coming in there in between wheat and barley for energy. So it's about 94% of the energy of wheat. If we look at the protein, which is a very rough kind of an estimate, it's more amino acids that we would look at, but just for the benefit of this presentation, if we look at protein, it would be slightly lower than barley and a good bit lower than wheat. But overall, as a nutritionist, you would say, look, we will have it ranking somewhere around the same value as if there's barley in the diet. So one can move out and one can move in a similar fashion. So that's nutritionist view of it. But has it been grown anywhere else? Well, as Richie said, it has been grown around Europe. So the Danes, for example, would have one of the biggest pig herds in Europe. And they've been growing it for many, many, many years. And the reason the Danes have been growing it is that their system in Denmark is a little bit different than in Ireland. If you have a pig unit in Denmark, you have to have the tillage ground to go with it. So for every 100 sows, you have to have a certain amount of tillage ground. So by and large, the Danish farmers will grow their own ingredients, they'll use it in the pig feed, and they'll put the pig slurry back out on the land. So it's kind of a circular economy and has been for a long period of time. So they have been using rye there as part of their rotation for a long time. So there is a good track record of rye being used in diets. So you might ask the obvious question, if rye has been used in diets in Denmark for a long time, and if the nutritional values are good, why is it not being used in Ireland? Well, one of the issues was the ergot fungus that Richie mentioned. So in the older varieties, this had been a risk. But in the newer varieties, this risk is much, much, much lower now because the pollination time and the fertilization time is a lot shorter. Therefore, the risk of the ergot fungus is much, much lower. So it's a good time now to start re-looking at the use of rye in pig diets. So that's what we've done in Teagasc. So it's fine saying the theory of it and looking at other countries and it worked for them. But really, I suppose eating, if you pardon the pun, as in the pudding. So what we've done is in Moorpark, we did a trial on the use of rye. It was Dr. Padder Lawler that ran the trial in the Pig Research Centre. And he looked at the performance effects of using rye for pig diets. And if I'm trying to encourage pig producers to use rye, this is really the information there that we're going to be showing to them. So the trial was done on a finisher pig trial. So a finisher pig usually is from 30 kilos up to a sale weight of 120 kilos. And the finisher pig will eat 65% of the total amount of feed that the pig will eat in its lifetime. So what happens in the finisher section is very, very important from an efficiency point of view, an economic point of view, etc. Since the trial that Padder did, it was obviously formulated on an energy basis and on an SID amino acid basis. And we compared it then with the gold standard of a wheat and barley a controlled diet. So that has been the gold standard for years and years in the pig sector. So we did 4 different diets, fed to 4 different groups of pigs. There was one diet is a controlled diet of your wheat and barley only. Next diet was 20% of rye, 40% of rye, and 60% of rye. So we fed this over the time where the pigs went on 30 kilos and they were finished at 120 kilos. So what were the results? As a pig producer, we're looking at intakes. Make sure there's no issue with intakes. There's no issue with tannins. There's no issue with anti-nutritional factors. We're looking at growth, the average daily gain of the pig. How fast was the pig able to grow on a daily basis? And the feed conversion. Obviously, all the feed in these trials is measured. The pigs are weighed on a continuous basis. So the figures we have are extremely accurate. And again, we looked at the 4 diets, the 0, 20, 40, and 60% rye. So overall, these were the figures we got. And At first impression, these figures is performance across all 4 diets was really, really good, way above average. So the growth rates there was over a kilo a day. So it's 1.17 kilos, say, for the control diet. But if you look at the 60% rye, it was 1.15. The feed conversion was also extremely good. Control diet was 2.4 and the 60% rye was 2.42. But when you did the stats in this, there was absolutely no difference. So we looked at growth and feed conversion there. There's no statistical difference between it. So this shows that rye really is an ingredient that could be considered for pig diets here in Ireland. It has been proven in trial work to really, really do the business. So from pig producers' point of view, this is the kind of information that they are going to really, really have an interest in. So what are our conclusions on it then? First of all, that rye inclusion rate of up to 40% in the diet produced excellent growth performance. It's considered a safe ingredient. There's no issue with intakes. There's no issue with anti-nutritional factors in this trial work. And also then from a diet formulation point of view, it's coming in somewhere around the same value as barley. So these again are messages that we'll be trying to get out to the pig sector to try and encourage the use of it. So if you're driving back up the motorway there this evening and you decided to switch off the radio and think about things in life and you're wondering, right, I do have an interest in rye. I've listened to Richie and Ciaran Collins will be coming on next showing the profitability of the crop. And you're kind of going, well, how do I move it on? What is my next step? One option is that you might be willing to grow it, but you don't know who's going to buy it. And as Richie said, you really need to find a buyer. Okay, so I suppose we're starting this off literally from the grassroots upwards or the rye roots upwards. So you need to find a buyer. So if you're not au fait with the pig sector, obviously what you're going to do is speak to your tillage advisor. So Teagasc will probably do some kind of an effort off a Teagasc Tinder effort here, that your the Teagasc Tillage Advisor will speak to the Teagasc Pig Advisor, and between the two of them, they'll try and set 2 people up in the same area that might have a similar interest in rye. The benefit of this is it's a farm to farm. There's no middle person involved in the middle of it, so it's a win-win for both sides. There are some issues there that you'll have to consider is storage. What's the volume that can be stored? Obviously, a pig producer is not going to want it all into 1 week. Quality control is also an issue, and the pricing is an issue. But these aren't things that are huge hurdles. With a little bit of work, we can work around it. And as I mentioned, John is going to talk about storage and some of the options that might be applicable there. If you decided, though, that these options there's a problem with one of these options that you can't get over, then I suppose the other option then is looking at a merchant. Okay, so even if if you go and ring up the merchant and say, I'm looking for rye, what's the story with sowing rye? And they tell you, well, I don't know, is there a market there? We can still do the same thing. You speak to your tillage advisor, they will speak to the pig advisor, and between the two of us, we will find a seller and a buyer. And then it's a case of those going to the merchant then and saying, right, I'm looking to sow it, I'm looking to buy it, we're looking for you to handle it, and what would the implications be of that? Obviously, if you're an agri-supplier, they're not a charity, so there will be a pricing effect of that, or a handling charge, or that will come into it. So it's not as attractive maybe as farm to farm, but it's still going to be attractive if you can grow rye, if you can grow it at more of a profit. And as I said, as you're going home this evening, if you really do think that rye is for you, even if you're only looking to dip your toe in the water, then I would encourage you then to make the first move and speak to your tillage advisor.
Many thanks to Michael for his insights. It's clear there is scope to supply home millers with rye in the coming years. We'll now move on and hear from Ciaran Collins, a tillage specialist with Teagasc, who shares financial data on rye and examines how it can contribute to overall farm profitability.
It does offer a chance to manage disease risk, particularly like the septoria, raw malaria. We have another crop in the rotation as, low disease risk here. Low take all, I suppose that is really the big one. Increased yield in that take all slot. It also gives us an option, I suppose, linked to that take all tolerance to extend that rotation out a little bit longer. You can stick in another crop being rye at the end of that rotation. I haven't it on the one here, but it's the most obvious one is the early sowing. It's suitable to sow from the 15th of September. And I suppose that's been a massive challenge in recent years. We're waiting, we're delaying, we don't want to sow early because of BYDV and disease risks. We can sow rye comfortably, say from mid-September on. So that's an obvious one. And then I hope to show later on, it certainly can increase profit over the duration of the rotation. So where do we put it? So this is just kind of following on from Richie's work. It performs well after break crops. In the Oak Park trials that Richie showed earlier on, you can get a yield equivalent to winter wheat or maybe marginally better. Its main strength though, it's an excellent option in a high take-all risk, that second slot after say winter wheat that might follow a break. And Richie showed us earlier on in the Oak Park trials where it exceeded the yield of winter barley by up to 2 tonnes per hectare. In my calculations for gross margins later on, I've just gone with a conservative 1 tonne per hectare. But I suppose just back on the take-all, it is more tolerant than wheat and barley, but as Richie said, it does get take-all. And very important, it's not a take-all break. And I think following cereals, as Richie said earlier on, you can get a high take-all risk there because of that inoculum build-up. In terms of ergot, I think it's kind of been in a part of all the presentations so far. And I think it's been well proven at this stage with the modern breeding techniques that we have that it is a very low risk. But I think the key one when we're talking about rotation is not to grow rye in successive years. And I think that's probably our best option of limiting ergot. But any of the farmers that I've spoken to that are growing rye, and when I ask them about ergot, I have to show them a picture. So, they haven't seen it so far. Another one, I suppose, that's a visible one, but not necessarily a problem, is that rye, controlling those volunteers. Rye doesn't necessarily produce any more volunteers than any other cereals, but obviously they're highly visible. And again, I suppose it's that place in the rotation not to follow rye with another winter cereal, to follow rye with maybe a non-cereal break crop and you can control them. Say the likes of oilseed rape or beans would be ideal. Spring cereal possibly as well, because you've got that overwinter period to control those volunteers if you need to. So then that's, I suppose, the agronomy piece, just to look at margins and what does rye look like relative to other crops that we're growing. And I suppose I have to say, the margins, as you can see them on the page at the moment, are very tight at the moment, and it's not to ignore that fact. I can take some questions at the end, but these are for comparison between rye and other crops you might consider growing. In terms of the cost changes from last year, we produce a cost and returns in the autumn. It's very much provisional. The published version in the spring would be our real guide. But the changes from, say, January this year is we do have an increase in fertiliser. We've a seed adjustment price there. It's back a little bit overall. We have made an allowance in winter barley for higher seed costs because 60% of the seed now is from varieties that have a tolerance for BYDV, and that does cost a little bit more. I think they're the main changes. We have factored in a small additional cost in winter wheat fungicide costs because I would assume a lot of crops for the coming season will get some treatment there. They're the major ones anyway. But I suppose in terms of what's on your page here, barley is factored in at 180. Now that's obviously a low bar at the moment. That's the kind of forward price-ish that we're working at the moment. Obviously that changes things substantially if that increases. So barley is a 180, wheat is plus 10 and oats is minus 10. Beans and malting barley are plus 30. And then what am I missing? The oilseed rape is in at 430. And we've put rye in based on, you've seen from the previous presentation there from Michael, we've put rye in at barley price. Okay. In terms of straw, we've taken the SIM rate which is 250, apart from the winter barley and the rye, which do produce more straw. So we factor those in the same at 300. And then the final piece is on spring beans. We've put the protein payment in at 500. That could be anything from 350 to 600, probably on the higher end of it this year. For the coming season, look, we factored in 500, but that's subject to change, obviously, depending on the area sown. So that's just maybe just an explanation really on the margins. But when you rank them in terms of, highest to lowest, you're seeing that beans are giving the highest margin there. But bear in mind that €500 of that margin is actually coming from the protein payment. Winter oilseed rape is next, and mainly due to the 430 relative to cereal price. If we did this 12 months ago, the winter oilseed rape was further down the table. Then you've got your spring malting barley. I suppose rye then, and we have factored in here 1 tonne per hectare over the yield of winter barley. So winter barley is in there at 8.9, rye is in at 9.9, and that's grown in a take-all slot. So that doesn't include rye that would be sown after break crop. And we're making the assumption, I suppose, a little bit like winter barley, the majority of rye would get sown in that take-all slot. I suppose the important thing about rye here, we're saying 1 tonne per hectare more than winter barley in that take-all slot. But if you look at the costs of production are very, very similar, And look, there's probably a little bit of scope, in terms of that yield. But as I said, we're just being conservative here. So rye is coming in there in around €400. And then I suppose you've got your winter oats, you've got your winter wheat. And then unfortunately at the moment, at current price, winter barley and spring feed barley are at the low bottom of the table there, just over €200. I should also say, when we do our cost returns booklet, sometimes we highlight the target yields. The yields that we're using for the crop margins in this presentation are the 5-year CSO average. Okay, should have probably said that at the very start, but that's your 5-year yield average. Okay. So what does rye look like in a rotation? So just to take your spring barley, continuous spring barley at your CSO yield average of 7.4 tonnes per hectare is leaving you that 205. So then I suppose this slide really is what I'm calling in inverted commas a typical rotation. There's no such thing obviously as a typical rotation, but just say a winter barley is an entry crop for winter oilseed rape, followed by a winter wheat, followed by a winter barley, a spring feed barley, back around to another break crop, then say spring beans, and then winter wheat. So when you look at that 7-year rotation, you're getting a 69% increase in the margin over the previous slide there where you had spring barley at 205. So then I suppose we're bringing rye into the equation now and see what does rye do to that inverted commas typical rotation. So we've removed the winter barley as the entry crop for winter oilseed rape. Followed that by a winter wheat. Then we've left in one of the winter barleys. There was 2 in the original rotation there, to lengthen out that rotation then by adding rye after that to get back to your spring beans and winter wheat. Okay, so from that continuous spring barley rotation, you're getting a 95% increase in the margin there, and obviously we had a 69% increase over our typical rotation. So I suppose what this slide is showing us, by replacing 2 winter barleys in the rotation with rye at current prices, CSO yields over 5 years, we're getting an increase in the rotation in the monetary value in the rotation from 69 to 95%. And then I suppose just to look at that margins table that we had, and just to look at it then in terms of trying to maximize the high margin crops. So obviously you're trying to get beans in there more often, you're trying to get winter oilseed rape. So, by putting beans in there, followed by winter wheat, bring in a winter oat there so you can get rye back in there again, winter oilseed rape, winter wheat, and rye again. So you've got rye in that rotation 3 times. And the objective of this last one is really just to look at how high can we go in the rotation based on current prices. And I suppose rye does come into that significant significantly because it does replace the winter barley effectively. And that's a 113% increase over your continuous spring barley there. So just to kind of put all of that together on one table, the writing is, I can hardly read it where I'm here, so I don't expect you to see it, but just to call out the numbers, your continuous spring barley rotation there at 205, the typical rotation, as I'm calling it, 346. Adding rye, which is taking out a winter barley and a spring barley from the typical rotation, is giving you 401. And then when you do just try to maximise, the rotation in terms of profitability, you're getting up there to 436. So that's, I suppose, just a summary on where rye fits into the margin. So as you can see, I suppose really, winter barley is the target one there in that take-all slot, and that seems to be where it's giving us the best return. So I suppose just to try and wrap the whole lot up together in terms of what is the optimal rotational position. So I would say from what we've seen all day and from what the figures, that's second or third cereal after a break crop, and that's maximising the take-all tolerance. I would say in terms of the rotation, in my opinion, it's the back end of the rotation before you go back around with a non-cereal break crop. Gives you that opportunity to control those volunteers. And again, you're maximising the take-all tolerance that it has. And as we've just seen there, look, rye stacks up financially compared to other cereal.
So that's it for today. And my thanks to Ciaran and Michael for their contribution at the Crops Forum. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.